The smell of smoke was still stuck in my hair when that woman walked into my courtroom like she owned the building. I remember sitting there in my black robe, exhausted, angry, running on maybe 2 hours of sleep after watching firefighters dig through what used to be my house. And then I looked up and saw her smiling at the bailiff like she was late for brunch instead of standing 5 feet away from the judge whose home had burned to the ground 3 nights earlier. That was the moment I realized something about people like Vanessa Crowley. They honestly believe consequences are things that happen to other people. Now, before I tell you how this whole thing exploded into federal investigations, insurance fraud, and enough HOA drama to make the evening news for 6 straight weeks, you need to understand what kind of woman Vanessa was and what kind of man my husband had been. My name is Eleanor Hayes. For 22 years, I serve as a county judge outside Asheville, North Carolina, mostly criminal court, which means I spent 2 decades staring at liars professionally. Drug dealers, scammers, abusive husbands, corrupt contractors. After a while, you stop listening to what people say and start paying attention to the tiny things. The pauses, the fake smiles, the way certain people look around a room like they're calculating angles instead of having conversations. Vanessa Crowley had that look from the very beginning. But when she first moved into Cedar Hollow Estates, I honestly didn't care enough to notice her much. My husband Ben had just died 6 months earlier after a brutal fight with pancreatic cancer. And grief does something strange to your world. It makes everything smaller, quieter. You stop thinking about the future because getting through Tuesday feels ambitious enough. Ben and I bought that little craftsman house back in 1998 when Cedar Hollow was still mostly teachers, mechanics, retired veterans, regular people with old trucks, and overgrown gardens. Ben lived gardens. The man could grow tomatoes the size of bowling balls and somehow convince birds to trust him like he was a Disney princess in work boots. Every morning he'd sit on the porch with black coffee and toss sunflower seeds into the yard while cardinals landed practically in his hands. After he died, I kept the routine going because, honestly, I didn't know what else to do with myself. Then Vanessa became HOA president, and suddenly everybody's mailbox mattered. Everybody's grass mattered. Everybody's fence color mattered. The first time she came onto my property, I was installing a privacy fence bin, and I had planned together during his final chemo treatments. Nothing fancy, just cedar panels around the back garden so I could sit outside without feeling like the whole neighborhood was watching me fall apart. I heard heels crunching through gravel behind me and turned around to find this perfectly highlighted blonde woman standing there in white designer athleisure holding a pink Stanley Cup like it was a royal accessory. "You must be Eleanor," she said, looking around my yard with the expression people usually reserve for crime scenes. "Judge Hayes," I corrected. She smiled, but not kindly. "Right. Well, Judge Hayes, your fence appears to violate HOA height restrictions." I remember blinking at her because for a second I genuinely thought she was joking. "My husband died 4 months ago," I said. "I'm building a fence." "Yes, and I'm very sorry for your loss," she replied immediately, in the exact tone people use when they absolutely are not sorry at all. "But rules are rules." And she actually pulled out a tape measure. I stood there holding a power drill while this woman measured my fence like she was investigating a homicide. 6'3", she announced dramatically. "Maximum allowable height is 6 feet. "It's exactly 6 feet, I said. "Well, my tape says otherwise." That was my first real glimpse at Vanessa Crowley. Not the polished neighborhood volunteer version she performed at HOA meetings. The real version. The one who enjoyed pushing people around because power was the only thing in her life that made her feel significant. I should have ignored her. Honestly, I tried. But then the letters started showing up. Violation notices. Threats of fines. Warnings about unapproved memorial decorations because I placed one of Ben's old fishing lanterns near the flower beds. One letter claimed my bird feeder created visual inconsistency within community standards. Another complained that my wind chimes produced emotionally disruptive noise pollution. Emotionally disruptive. I wish I was kidding. At first it felt ridiculous, almost funny in a sad suburban kind of way. I'd spent 20 years sentencing violent criminals, and now some woman named Vanessa was threatening me over birdseed. But then Walt Mercer knocked on my door one evening, carrying a six-pack and looking nervous. Walt had lived in Cedar Hollow since the 70s. Vietnam veteran, permanently smelled like cedarwood and cigarette smoke. She's doing this to everybody she thinks won't fight back, he told me quietly. Older folks mostly. Single moms. Anybody struggling. Turns out Vanessa had already forced one elderly couple to remove a wheelchair ramp because it hurt neighborhood aesthetics. A Hispanic family 3 streets over got fined nearly $2,000 for parking a work van in their own driveway. One widow sold her house after Vanessa threatened legal action over garden statues. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Because grief will make you tired, but injustice will wake you right back up. And once I started digging into Cedar Hollow's HOA records, I realized Vanessa Crowley wasn't just a controlling busybody with too much free time. She was hiding something, and whatever it was, she was getting desperate enough to destroy people over it. The funny thing about corruption in suburban neighborhoods is that it almost never starts big. It starts with tiny little tests. Somebody ignores a fake fine. Somebody gets intimidated into paying a fee they don't legally owe. Somebody decides it's easier to stay quiet than argue with a woman screaming about property values in an HOA meeting. That's how people like Vanessa Crowley operate. Not with violence at first, but exhaustion. They wear communities down until nobody has enough energy left to push back. Unfortunately for Vanessa, I had spent most of my adult life professionally dismantling manipulative people for a living. So one rainy Thursday night, I poured myself a bourbon Ben used to save for special occasions, sat down in his old basement workshop, and started reading through 5 years of Cedar Hollow HOA financial records. And about 40 minutes in, I found the first crack. There were landscaping payments that didn't match invoices. Emergency repair funds that disappeared without documented work orders. Legal expenses charged to the HOA despite no active lawsuits. Small numbers individually. 2,000 here, 5,000 there, but when you added everything together, we were talking nearly $300,000 missing from community accounts over 4 years. I remember leaning back in Ben's old chair thinking, "Oh, Vanessa, what the hell are you doing?" Then things got weird. The next morning I walked outside and found 3 men in reflective vests standing in my backyard, taking photographs of my house. No warning, no notice, just random strangers wandering around my property while drinking gas station coffee. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked. One guy looked uncomfortable immediately. The other 2 avoided eye contact. "HOA inspection," the tallest one muttered. "There is no such thing as random HOA property inspections in North Carolina," I replied. Then Vanessa appeared from around the side of the house, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the rain. "Judge Hayes," she said brightly, "we've received complaints regarding safety hazards." "From who?" "I can't disclose resident identities." "Interesting," I said, "because I can disclose trespassing charges." That wiped the smile off her face for about half a second. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "You really should stop making this difficult, Eleanor." There was something cold underneath the sentence. Not irritation, not annoyance, fear. That was the first time I realized Vanessa wasn't escalating because she enjoyed the drama anymore. She was escalating because she needed me distracted. And once that idea got into my head, I couldn't let it go. So I started talking to neighbors. Quietly, carefully. Turns out almost everyone had a story. Mrs. Alvarez across the street had been threatened with legal action because her grandson's autism support swing was visually distracting. A retired firefighter named Dean got fined repeatedly because his truck had rust spots. One family had received violation notices for leaving children's bicycles visible after sunset. Every single complaint targeted people who either lacked money, influence, or energy to fight back. Classic predator behavior. But the real turning point came because of my cat. His name was Murphy, old orange tabby, mean as hell to everybody except Ben. After Ben died, Murphy started sleeping on his side of the bed every night like he was guarding the spot. One afternoon, I came home from court and couldn't find him anywhere. At first I figured he'd slipped outside again, but then I noticed the back gate hanging open, and immediately my stomach dropped, because I knew I'd locked it that morning. I searched for 6 hours, through storm drains, woods, backyards. I walked the entire neighborhood with a flashlight, calling his name like a crazy person while rain soaked through my jacket. Around midnight, Walt found me, sitting on the curb crying. "You okay?" he asked softly. "No," I admitted. "I really think somebody let him out on purpose." The next morning, a vet clinic 20 miles away called. Murphy had been found injured near a construction site off the highway. Broken rib, torn paw, severe dehydration. Somebody had apparently chased him with landscaping equipment before he ran into traffic. I sat in that veterinary office holding this trembling old cat against my chest while rage built so hard inside me I could barely breathe. And then the security footage arrived. See, after Vanessa's little inspection stunt, I'd installed cameras around the property. The footage showed everything. Vanessa entering my backyard while I was at work. Vanessa opening the gate. Vanessa walking away without closing it. 20 minutes later, one of the HOA landscaping crews came through using industrial leaf blowers directly toward the garden where Murphy liked sleeping. My hands actually shook watching it, because suddenly this wasn't petty neighborhood harassment anymore. This was cruelty, intentional cruelty, and cruel people almost always become dangerous people eventually. That night, I called an old friend named Rebecca Sloan, former federal prosecutor, absolute shark in a courtroom, the kind of woman who could make grown men confess to tax fraud just by adjusting her glasses. After I explained everything, there was a long silence on the phone. Then she said, "Eleanor, I need you to listen carefully. You're describing organized financial behavior. What does that mean? It means this woman probably isn't stealing for handbags and Botox money. She's building something." The next 48 hours changed everything. Rebecca helped me subpoena HOA banking records through a resident access request. Walt quietly connected me with former residents who'd moved away suddenly over the past 3 years. One retired accountant named Frank Dorsey discovered reserve fund transfers routed through a construction company connected to Vanessa's husband. And then Pat Holloway showed up. Now, Pat looked harmless. 70 years old, tiny little grandmother type who baked peach cobbler and wore bird sweaters. Pat was also retired FBI, financial crimes, which honestly felt very on-brand for my life at that point. She spread folders across my dining table and said, "Your HOA president has used 3 different legal names in 12 years. Esther de Hair." "What?" But nodded calmly. Vanessa Crowley isn't her original identity. Neither was Dana Mercer in Arizona or Evelyn Price in Nevada. I felt cold all over. Pat continued sliding photographs across the table. Different hair colors, different cities, same woman. In every community, Pat explained, there were HOA disputes, insurance claims, sudden fires, missing reserve funds, and eventually lawsuits that disappeared before trial. "You think she's running scams through neighborhoods?" "I think," Pat replied carefully, "that your little HOA, Karen, may actually be a professional criminal." I wish I could explain the feeling that hit me in that moment, because suddenly every nasty letter, every fake violation, every weird inspection, every attempt to isolate vulnerable homeowners, it all snapped together into one horrifying picture. Vanessa wasn't obsessed with control. Control was just the tool. Money was the goal. And the second she realized I was figuring it out, things became genuinely dangerous. 3 nights later, I woke up at 2:11 a.m. to the sound of glass breaking downstairs. Not thunder, not the house settling. Glass. I grabbed Ben's old baseball bat from beside the bed and crept in a hallway barefoot while my heart hammered so hard I could hear in my ears. The house was dark except for kitchen lights spilling across the floor, and then I smelled gasoline. That smell hit me before I saw anything else. Gasoline. And standing in my kitchen, wearing black gloves and holding a red gas can, was one of Vanessa Crowley's contractors. For one strange second, neither of us moved. The guy just stood there frozen in my kitchen, holding that gas can while rain hammered against the windows outside, and Murphy hissed somewhere behind me in the dark. I remember thinking how unbelievably normal he looked. Mid-30s maybe, work boots, thinning hair, face like somebody you'd forget 10 seconds after meeting him. And then he bolted. He dropped the gas can, slammed through the back door, and disappeared into the woods behind my property before I could even process what was happening. By the time sheriff deputies arrived, all they found were muddy footprints, a smashed kitchen window, and gasoline splashed across my hardwood floors like somebody had started painting the house for hell itself. The deputy looked around quietly and finally said, "Ma'am, whoever did this wasn't trying to scare you. No, they were trying to practice." That was the night I stopped sleeping at my house. Walt insisted I stay in his guest room while Rebecca and Pat started coordinating with state investigators. By then, the entire thing had spiraled way beyond neighborhood drama. Financial crimes units got involved. Insurance investigators started pulling records. Turns out Vanessa and her husband had recently increased the insurance valuation on their own home by almost $2 million despite making almost no actual renovations. And then Pat found the final piece. Vanessa had filed preliminary paperwork regarding potential fire exposure risks from neighboring properties less than 2 weeks earlier. Neighboring properties. Mine. The woman was literally setting up an insurance claim before the fire even happened. That's when Rebecca finally looked at me across Walt's kitchen table and said the sentence that made everybody go silent. "She's planning to burn your house down." You ever hear something so insane your brain rejects it at first? That was me, because HOA drama is supposed to stay suburban. Petty, annoying, passive-aggressive Facebook posts about garbage bins and lawn height. Your brain doesn't naturally jump from fence violations to attempted homicide for insurance fraud. But suddenly every piece fit. The harassment, the inspections, the fake safety complaints, the contractors. She needed me distracted long enough to stage an accident. And 3 days later, she did it. The explosion happened a little after 3 in the morning. I woke up to Walt yelling my name while orange light flashed through his curtains like lightning. We ran outside barefoot, and from the top of his driveway, I could see my house burning against the night sky. Not just burning, gone. Flames ripped through the roof so fast it looked planned because it was planned. Windows exploded outward. Smoke rolled across Cedar Hollow in thick black waves while sirens screamed closer from town. I remember standing there in borrowed sweatpants, staring at 26 years of my life collapsing into fire and thinking about the stupidest possible thing. Ben's coffee mug, that chipped blue mug he used every single morning. I knew it was still sitting beside the sink. And for some reason, that destroyed me more than losing the house itself. Walt wrapped his arm around my shoulders while firefighters fought a battle they already knew they couldn't win. Then Vanessa showed up. I swear to God, that woman actually arrived at the scene wearing a cream-colored raincoat and carrying a damn umbrella like she was attending a candlelight vigil instead of watching the results of her own crime. And somehow, she still thought she was the smartest person there. She walked straight toward a local news camera and said, "This tragedy really highlights the importance of proper HOA safety enforcement." I watched 3 FBI agents exchange the exact same expression at once. It was the look people make when a suspect accidentally confesses before the interview even starts. Because what Vanessa didn't know was that federal investigators had already subpoenaed her insurance records 12 hours earlier. They already had surveillance photos of her contractors near my property. They already knew about the reserve fund thefts and fraudulent transfers. And thanks to Murphy's security footage, they also had enough probable cause to start tearing apart her entire life. The arrests happened 2 mornings later. Federal marshals hit both houses just before sunrise. Vanessa came out screaming in silk pajamas while reporters filmed from across the street. Her husband looked like he aged 20 years in 30 seconds. Neighbors lined sidewalks holding coffee cups, watching the whole thing unfold in complete silence. Nobody defended them. Not one person. Because eventually communities reach a breaking point with people like that. The trial lasted 8 weeks. Insurance fraud, gwaed froth, embezzlement, conspiracy, arson, attempted murder. Turns out Vanessa Crowley had been running variations of the same scam in 4 different states under 3 different identities for nearly 15 years. HOA communities were perfect targets because nobody pays attention until the damage becomes catastrophic. But my favorite moment happened during sentencing. Vanessa stood there in County Jail Orange, still trying to sound superior somehow, still acting like everybody else was beneath her, and she looked directly at me before the judge read the sentence. "You ruined my life," she said. And y'all, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because after everything she'd done, after the lies, the cruelty, the greed, the fire, she still genuinely believed she was the victim. The judge gave her 37 years. Her husband got 12. Most of the stolen money was recovered through asset seizures and redistributed back to homeowners in Cedar Hollow. Walt became HOA president after that, which honestly was hilarious because the man still forgets half his passwords and absolutely refuses to learn Excel. As for me, I rebuilt the house. Smaller this time. Quieter. The garden came back first. Then the porch. Then the birds. Murphy still sleeps on Ben's side of the bed. And every now and then, usually late at night when the house is still, I think about how close evil came to winning simply because people were too tired or too intimidated to stand together. So let me ask you something. What would you have done? Would you have fought back or walked away before it got dangerous? And honestly, what do you think the line is between protecting a community and controlling people? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I promise you, after this happened, I started seeing neighborhoods very differently.